Hey guys, tonight we're sinking down into the dark, into a story where your lungs already feel tight before anything has even happened. Imagine yourself in a narrow wooden box, the lid pressed close enough that you can hear your own heartbeat bouncing off the boards. The air feels warmer every second, stale as if you've been left inside a cupboard with no door handle, and you don't know if you'll be let out tomorrow, or at all. That's the kind of place you're heading with me tonight, and just between us, you probably won't survive this one. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me your location and the local time. I like knowing where in the world you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into a palace where silks rustle in the hallways. But beneath the marble shine, there's gossip as sharp as knives. The court needs a spectacle, a punishment that teaches everyone what happens when royalty defies unwritten rules. And so someone has the brilliant idea: lock the princess in a coffin for a full week. It isn't an execution, not technically, because she'll still have a chance to breathe, barely. But it's close enough to death that every whisper of air feels like stolen property. As you slide into her perspective, the first creak of the coffin lid makes your skin crawl. The wood smells of resin and damp earth, as though it was carved for a funeral long before it became her prison. The guards laugh quietly, making bets on how many days she'll last. One suggests 2 days, another scoffs and says none. The cruelty comes easy to them, like humming a tune. And you, pinned inside this box, can't even kick hard enough to make a dent. It's worth pausing on how strange this punishment really is. Across different parts of Europe, confinement in boxes wasn't unheard of, though it was usually done to common criminals, not members of royal households. In some cases, coffins were nailed shut as mock burials, a grim warning to others. One quirky tidbit: in certain Italian towns, there was a custom of parading the condemned in coffins through the marketplace, letting crowds toss food scraps at them before releasing them. It sounds theatrical, almost like a bad carnival act, but for the victim, it was a brush with suffocation and shame. Our princess isn't dragged through the marketplace. Her disgrace happens in silence, tucked away from the public eye. But the echoes of that same cruel theater ring around her coffin. The first night drags endlessly. You breathe shallowly, counting heartbeats. Every scratch on the wood becomes a monster's fingernail in the dark. You imagine worms chewing the outside, as though you've already been buried. The air is heavy, and you start rationing it instinctively, taking smaller sips as though oxygen is water. Funny thing, you start bargaining with yourself, promising you'll never complain about the smell of horses again if you just get out alive. By the second day, hunger creeps in like a cat pawing at your stomach. The coffin has no food, no water, just you and your thoughts. Historians still argue whether the princess had a small water flask hidden with her, slipped in by a sympathetic maid, or if she endured without it. Some say her survival proves that aid was given. Others point to the possibility of her body being so young and resilient that sheer will carried her through. Either way, every swallow feels like gravel, and your tongue sticks to the roof of your mouth like glue, the oddest part. Sounds from the outside become magnified. You hear footsteps above, muffled voices drifting in like distant radio static. You imagine court ladies betting jewels on your survival, or priests whispering prayers in case your ghost shows up. Even laughter filters through. Your suffering is someone else's entertainment. That twisted reality check makes you want to scream, but screaming costs air, and you're not willing to pay. On the third day, hallucinations blur with memories. You recall sunlight, how it felt warm, like golden syrup poured over your skin. You imagine bread, fresh from an oven, so vivid you almost smell it through the coffin cracks. And then comes the joke your mind plays on you. You picture yourself eating the coffin itself, gnawing on pine boards like they're gingerbread. You even laugh, which is ridiculous, because there's nothing funny about chewing wood. But the laugh helps for a moment, Meanwhile, outside the coffin, courtiers argue about the meaning of this punishment. Is it justice? Is it spectacle? Or is it superstition? An attempt to cleanse the princess of some imagined curse by forcing her through a living burial. People in that era often mix punishment with ritual, believing that survival itself proved divine favor. If she lives, maybe she's meant to rule someday. If she dies, the coffin becomes a coffin after all, and the curse is broken. By the fourth day, your body weakens. Every joint aches, every shift feels like climbing a mountain. You wonder if your ancestors can hear you, if the dead in their silent crypts are amused by your noisy struggle. You picture them shaking their heads, muttering that royal blood isn't what it used to be. That sarcastic thought makes you grin faintly. See, even buried alive, you can still mock your own family. At this point, hunger and thirst blend into one dull ache. Your dreams are feverish. You see rivers of wine, fountains of clear water, and once absurdly, a talking goat who offers you a sandwich. That one makes you chuckle so hard you cough, and the cough steals precious breath. But at least for a moment you're not afraid. Then comes the fifth night, when the coffin feels smaller, pressing tighter. The wood seems to bend inward, though you know it's just your mind exaggerating. You scratch the inside with your nails, carving little marks as though anyone will ever count them. You mutter nonsense poems, sing half-remembered songs. That's survival, keeping your mind noisy enough that silence doesn't swallow you whole. And through all this, the princess, that is, you, somehow holds on. The coffin becomes both enemy and ally, a torment that also shields you from executioner's blades or poisoner's cups. You wonder if this is the strangest form of mercy ever invented. By the sixth day, your pulse is slow, your lips cracked, but your eyes are sharp with determination. You've made it this far, and that stubborn royal streak refuses to give up now. Guards peek inside at one point, expecting to see a corpse, and instead find you glaring back like a cat unwilling to be thrown out of its favorite box. The shock in their eyes almost makes you laugh again. Almost, and when the seventh dawn arrives, the lid finally creaks open. Fresh air floods in like a waterfall, so sweet you could cry. Your limbs feel like stone, but your mind roars with triumph. You survived the coffin, the week, the trial no one expected you to endure. You're carried out of the box like a relic, weak but still undeniably breathing, and that fact alone turns heads faster than a scandal in the banquet hall. The princess, meaning you, was supposed to crumble, supposed to wither into a cautionary tale. Instead, you've become something else, a symbol, a riddle, maybe even a living omen. Courtiers shuffle closer with wide eyes, whispering as though speaking too loudly might break the fragile miracle before them. The coffin was meant to bury you, but instead it elevates you. Superstition clings to you like a second skin. The palace corridors echo with murmurs that you're no longer entirely mortal, that 7 nights entombed must have tethered you to unseen forces. Some servants cross themselves when you pass. Others bow lower, unsure whether to treat you like a saint or a spectre. Historians still argue whether this wave of fear was genuine belief or political theatre. After all, nothing cements power quite like convincing people you've brushed shoulders with death and returned untouched. Here's the thing, the era was steeped in omens. People measured fate in the flight of birds, in the patterns of candle smoke, even in the way bread split when torn. One quirky tidbit: in parts of medieval Germany, bakers believed loaves that cracked loudly while cooling carried warnings from the spirit world. So imagine what they thought of a princess who cracked open her own coffin instead of letting death have the final say. If bread could carry messages, surely you were an entire prophecy walking. Still, survival doesn't taste sweet right away. Your body is a map of aches, tongue parched, muscles jelly, bones sore, as if they've aged decades. You're dressed again in court finery, jewels laid on your fragile frame like armor, but under the silk you're still trembling. And yet the trembling is hidden by the glow of gossip. You've become the Coffin Princess, a nickname whispered with awe, disgust, or envy, depending on who utters it. Religious voices seize the moment. Priests preach that God has spared you for a reason, their sermons weaving your story into living parable. A few fringe mystics, however, mutter that you've been reborn, no longer bound by ordinary human fate. Some even compare you to Orpheus, except you didn't venture into the underworld. You brought the underworld to yourself and stayed there for a week. Meanwhile, the superstitions bloom into ritual. Guards who once mocked you now rub their fingers along the coffin wood for protection before heading into battles or duels. Maids sneak splinters of the box, tying them to charms they wear around their necks. Even visiting merchants carry rumors back to their homelands that in this kingdom death doesn't quite stick, at least not when it comes to royal blood. This obsession isn't entirely harmless. Every superstition has two edges, fear and reverence. Some courtiers whisper that you've been touched by darkness, that your survival is less miracle and more bargain. They eye you with suspicion, scanning your shadow as if expecting horns to sprout. In candlelit halls, you catch them crossing themselves twice when you enter. It's almost funny. Spend a week in a coffin, and suddenly everyone thinks you're auditioning for the role of ghost. Yet even suspicion grants power. You sit at feasts again, your place at the table polished and undeniable, and conversations stall when you lift a goblet. That silence is its own authority. It's as though you've been stitched into legend before you've even grown fully into adulthood. The palace, of course, knows how to spin a story. Minstrels compose ballads where you endure your coffin like a martyr, smiling serenely in the dark, while angels whisper courage into your ears. It's exaggerated nonsense. You know that inside the box you weren't smiling, you were wheezing and muttering about goats offering sandwiches, but the ballads catch fire. Villagers miles away hum the tune, not realizing the heroine is still alive, still flinching at the memory of scratching wood in the dark. And so the myths pile up. Some say ravens circled the palace the night before you emerged, as if keeping vigil. Others claim a streak of lightning struck nearby, splitting a tree in half at the exact moment you first gasped fresh air. Historians still argue whether these were later embellishments or actual reports. Personally, you suspect the ravens were just bored crows, and the lightning was a creative way to make the weather sound dramatic. But stories love drama, and people love believing them. What's certain is that your survival shifts the balance of court politics. Rivals who once plotted against you grow cautious. After all, if poison or dagger fails, and even a coffin can't finish you, then maybe crossing you isn't worth the gamble. Allies, meanwhile, see a banner of hope in your endurance, rallying behind the idea that you've been marked for greatness. And through it all, you're still just trying to remember how to sleep without dreaming of walls pressing in. Here's the irony. While everyone else is convinced you've touched eternity, you're more aware of your mortality than ever. The coffin etched that into your bones. You notice every flicker of light, every bite of bread, every breeze. The world is louder, brighter, more precious. And sometimes, when the courtiers are done whispering and the palace is quiet, you laugh softly to yourself. Because the truth is, you weren't saved by divine will or supernatural bargain. You were saved by stubbornness, by your own refusal to quit breathing. Survival wasn't magic. It was grit, but you let them believe the legends because legends are useful. They keep you alive in ways a sword never could. You even drop hints now and then, leaning into the role. A little pause before answering. A faint smile in the dark corners of a feast hall. It doesn't take much to remind people that you've been places they fear to tread. And somewhere in the middle of all this superstition, you realize the coffin hasn't just marked you with fear. It's given you a stage. You've gone from pawn to symbol, from fragile princess to figure of awe. The punishment was supposed to silence you, but instead it carved your voice into stone. Into stone. The weeks roll forward, and the coffin becomes less a punishment and more a haunting companion. Everywhere you go, people see it in their mind's eyes, even if it's hidden away in some dusty storeroom of the palace. You could be sipping watered wine in a sunlit garden, yet the courtiers squint, as though they can still hear the coffin lid closing over your head. That's the legacy of survival. It follows you like a shadow, impossible to shrug off. Soon, the stories begin drifting beyond palace walls, spreading like smoke into the villages and farmlands. Farmers gossip at wells about how their princess beat the grave. Tavern singers turn the tale into ale-soaked verses, each version taller than the last. In one, you wrestle Death himself in the coffin and pin him down for 7 days. In another, angels descend with buckets of water, pouring life through invisible cracks. Historians still argue whether these tales were deliberately encouraged by the crown to cement loyalty, or whether common folk just loved a good exaggeration. Either way, your survival transforms into a kind of folk miracle, binding you tighter to the people than any gilded procession could. Of course, not everyone is thrilled. Some nobles whisper that the ordeal changed you in ways they can't quite name. They flinch at your laugh, too brittle after so many days in silence. They notice how you sometimes touch walls absent-mindedly, as if checking for cracks. They label it eerie, though you know it's just habit. You can't unlearn the coffin's closeness. But fear works in your favor. Rivals who once schemed against you now hesitate, caught between seeing you as fragile and untouchable. One quirky tidbit even emerges. Certain rivals supposedly slept with sprigs of rosemary under their pillows, convinced it would guard them from the restless aura of a princess who had cheated the grave. You adapt quickly, wielding the legend like a tool. When you speak in council, voices quiet. When you rise from your chair, attention follows as though pulled on invisible strings. It's not about what you say, it's about who you are. The coffin survivor, the one who defied suffocation. That identity sticks harder than any crown or title. You didn't choose it, but you'd be foolish not to use it. Still, late at night, the memories claw back. Dreams where the coffin shrinks until it's the size of a cradle, and you're curled inside, barely breathing. You wake with nails digging into your palms, half expecting splinters. Those nights remind you that survival isn't free. It's paid for in restless sleep. But you don't tell anyone that. Let them think you're unshaken. Let the myth grow stronger than the fragile truth. Eventually, chroniclers set quills to parchment, recording your ordeal as history. Some accounts insist you were sustained by secret prayers. Others claim sympathetic guards slipped food through tiny holes, and still others argue it was sheer providence. The debates rage on, each scholar eager to stamp their theory into permanence. Historians still argue whether you were a victim of cruelty, a pawn in ritual theater, or a cunning survivor who turned punishment into power. You, of course, keep your silence. Mystery feeds the legend better than any confession could. Over time, the coffin itself takes on relic-like status. Visitors ask to see it, nobles dare each other to touch it. Some say keeping it in the palace invites misfortune. Others claim it wards off enemies. Eventually, it's hidden away, locked behind iron doors, where only the boldest dare to look. But you carry its memory everywhere, as much a part of you as your own heartbeat. And so the punishment that was supposed to erase you ends up rewriting you. You're no longer just a princess. You're a walking reminder that endurance can bend even the cruelest intentions. The coffin was meant to close your story, yet it cracked open a new chapter, one that echoes long after your own footsteps fade. And now, as you lean back with me in the quiet of this late hour, you realize what that coffin really gave you. It gave you proof that sometimes survival itself is louder than power, sharper than punishment, stranger than any law could hope to be. And now, the lid has closed gently on tonight's story, not with nails or cruelty, but with the soft hush of reflection. You can feel the pace slowing, the edges of the tale dissolving like mist at dawn. The princess may have walked free from her coffin, but here you are, safe in your own bed, breathing deeply, with air that is yours alone to claim. Let yourself picture her lying in that box one last time, but instead of fear, imagine calm. Imagine the darkness turning velvety, wrapping her like a blanket. Picture the heartbeat steadying, the breath quiet but sure, until the walls no longer feel like a trap, but simply a space for rest. In that softened vision, the coffin is no longer punishment. It's a cocoon, holding her steady until she can step out stronger. The same is true for you, listening now. Whatever the day pressed down upon you, whatever crowded thoughts rattled around like restless chains, you've made it here, to this softer edge of night. You've endured, and now you can let it all drift. Breathe slower, let your muscles release the tension they've carried, and know that you're safe, far from the noise of courts, far from the schemes of history. In the end, survival isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's simply about staying still long enough for dawn to come. So let the silence here cradle you, let the hum of the fan blur into nothingness, and allow your own story to pause for a while. You don't need legends tonight, only rest. Sweet dreams, my friend. May the night wrap you in peace, and may you wake tomorrow lighter than you were today.